Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Securing Web3 Advanced Ethical Hacking for the Next Generation Internet. I am Reenal Vikiria, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to question and answers. Now, let's hear directly from our speaker, Marlene Dihard, as she introduces herself and share insights on securing Web3.
Thank you so much. So yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all you cybersecurity professionals and the cyber curious. Thank you for spending this time today so that we can talk about emerging threats in Web3. I also want to acknowledge the ethical hacking milestone that was just mentioned, the CEH version 13, which now incorporates AI, which is also part of what hopefully we will cover today is Web3, which is also including decentralized technologies, blockchain, and AI. So on that note, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so today we're going to cover and level set on an understanding of what is meant by Web3. We're going to look at the history of the internet versions, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, some of the comparisons, also a deeper dive into Web 3 and the components of Web 3, and then we're going to segue into security threats and vulnerabilities and some tools that can help you as cybersecurity professionals. So a brief history of the web. Here I'm showing the Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, as we often refer to for HTTP or www 1, 2, and 3. So starting with the 1990 to the early 2000s, Web 1 is often referred to as the read-only web, characterized by static websites. Then as we get into the mid-2000s and to present, we see that it's more or less the social web, the rise of user-generated content, social media platforms, but still very much centralized platforms are dominating. And now as we segue into what's called Web 3, it has its roots going back to 2014 and emerging today. Web 3 was coined in 2014 by Ethereum co-founder Gavin Wood. Gavin Wood is also one of the, well, he is currently managing Polkadot. It's a very popular blockchain Web3 platform for scaling and securing Web3 Ethereum-based blockchain services. And he also is credited with developing Solidity, which is mainly for developing smart contracts running on Ethereum protocol. Also, when we talk about the decentralized web, the idea is that it's more of user-centric and secure, intelligent, powered by blockchain technology, AI, and semantic web principles. Okay, so let's do a little bit deeper dive on the comparisons. Here we see that from Web 1, 2 to 3, the architecture goes from centralized to decentralized. Data ownership from websites, platforms, as we've already mentioned, social media platforms, for example, to user-owned and generated content, and in many cases, even automated or AI-generated content. Also, we see that the interactions from Web 1 were very limited, static, Web 2 going more to social and collaborative, and Web 3 immersive and semantic. Technologies, here you can see HTML, HTTP, social media, JavaScript, Ajax in Web 2. And again, these are high-level summaries, but I think you understand there's many more languages and technologies running from Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3, but at a high level, we're going now into decentralized technologies of blockchain, AI, and semantic web. Some examples you can see here. We won't spend a lot of time. You can look for yourself. But in the next few slides, we will look into the Web3 ecosystem of some examples of decentralized applications. The term dApps is referring to these decentralized applications that are running on top of Web3 technologies. Okay, so a little bit deeper dive into Web3 specifically. So we've already talked about decentralization. So this concept is that now the technology is supporting decentralized content, not necessarily owned by platform content providers, but by users or technology that is enabling the decentralization. Smart contracts would be an example of decentralization and information that is being managed by systems and algorithms, consensus algorithms, for example, and smart contracts. Then we go to open source. There's a lot of open source technologies in Web3. I give some examples here. Bitcoin, for example, is open source and a example of a blockchain protocol. Ethereum, there's many others. I also wanted to call out TensorFlow, which is a popular open source AI framework. So there's many open source frameworks that are actually fueling the innovation. And user control, so this is a big difference between Web 1, Web 2, where now there's this concept of self-sovereign identity systems, whether users are able to interact or machine code is interacting on behalf of an autonomous user. So users and machines are able to manage content. Also the immersive experiences. So when we hear about terms like metaverse platforms, that would also be in the Web3 technology space. Tokenization is an example of representing assets into cryptographic, digitally signed and managed assets that can be referenced through an immutable blockchain service, for example. And then, of course, the semantic web, which the history of the semantic web is also lending itself to machine learning and AI, but it's the concept of being able to have metadata, tagging of content so that it's readable by machines. And next, I wanted to give you an overview. This is, again, just a high-level overview of Web3, what's called the layered architecture. So oftentimes you'll hear about Web3 technologies as being maybe layer 1, or layer 2, or where the decentralized applications are happening in the application layer. So this is a conceptual diagram of the layered architecture in Web3. And as you get into a specific Web3 platform, whether it's AI, semantic web, or a blockchain service or DeFi applications, they'll have similar specific architecture diagrams that will describe where the interactions, where the technologies, the protocols are operating in these various layers. You can see you start with an infrastructure layer, a network layer, protocol layer, and services, optional components, maybe for helping with scaling, kind of getting into the application space or the logic space with smart contracts, for example, and then your decentralized applications. Also, there's a couple concepts that I want to talk through on this slide. So you may hear things like the consensus algorithms. So the topics we're going to talk about on this slide right now, keep in mind that these are exactly where some of the security vulnerabilities and threats are. You have consensus algorithms that oftentimes are using even centralized applications or technology with decentralized tech stack. You have the virtual machines, like an EVM, an Ethereum virtual machine, for example. You have the boundaries. So many security risks are actually happening across these different layers, across these trust boundaries, as we'll see in some examples. You have new protocols that have weaknesses in them themselves, and also some of the programming languages. Okay, so this is pretty much the last slide that we have on level setting our understanding of Web3, but again, just another example of some of the applications, some of the platforms that are running in Web3, you may be familiar with them. So when we talk about the Web3 ecosystem, what I want to hopefully impress on you today is it's really a plus situation. So it's all of the security classic risks, threats, vulnerabilities from Web 1, Web 2, and now into Web 3. For example, we're going to cover advanced phishing. So with the acceleration of AI-generated content, many cybersecurity professionals have become aware of the threats that advanced phishing has. Also, private key compromise. So this is something that is true today in our classic environments, but more or less we're seeing more private key compromises because blockchain services, the technology that is running with the consensus algorithms and smart contracts and so forth, there's a lot of key exchange, a lot of cryptography. And so things can go wrong with the implementations of these capabilities on the particular platform. So we're seeing lots of key compromise issues. Smart contract exploits, that would be something that is definitely unique and specific to Web3, but we'll see that the cybersecurity principles of understanding the vulnerabilities and threats will be the same as other examples in Web 2, where you're exchanging data, for example, across trust boundaries using APIs, other ways to transfer data, and being able to manipulate some of the logic that is happening with the interactions with smart contracts and the code and the implementations on these platforms. There's also decentralized finance, also a term called DeFi vulnerabilities that we'll see that gets introduced into the threat frameworks that we're going to look at. Consensus mechanism attacks and ontology and data layer attacks. This would be more specific to, for example, semantic web and being able to corrupt data sources that are the underlining layer where the machine automation is referring to that particular data set, and that data set may have issues or with integrity and other problems. Okay, so the next thing I want to introduce is this report that comes out every quarter. And if you're new to the space of Web3, I highly recommend that you take a look at this report. I'm pulling the latest report from CertIC, their hacked quarterly edition on Web3 security. And it gives a wonderful overview of the top security threats and examples of some of the compromises. So once again, we see here that even today, we are struggling with phishing, business email compromise. So the same is true in the Web3 space. And here there's an example of the most costly attack that happened. And you can see that the attack was a financial value here on a DeFi platform where there were actually 65 incidents leading up to this total cost here, but the report will break it down, but you can see that phishing remains to be one of the top threats. Also, private key compromise was the second one. And then we see a lot of security vulnerabilities in the Ethereum platform, the Ethereum protocol, applications built on top of Ethereum. So you can see that this is also trending. And some of the threats that are unique in Web3 and DeFi platforms are some scams that we'll talk about, and basically exploits that are unique to vulnerabilities with the implementations of the Ethereum protocol and network. Okay, so please take a look at this report. It actually helps with your understanding of the Web3 terminology and some of the specifics around these classic types of security vulnerabilities, but how they're implemented in the Web3 space. Okay, next I want to highlight a really great resource. You can go to this resource. It's the DeFi Llama, and defilama.com/hacks. You can go there, and they have a daily report of these platforms that are suffering compromise. And so what you can see here, I pulled a recent report, and you can see that they've actually classified the types of vulnerabilities and then the techniques for those. So what you see is weaknesses in infrastructure, smart contract vulnerabilities, protocol logic flaws, and ecosystem where multiple protocols are involved and the attacker is taking advantage of the weaknesses, really cross the trust boundaries and exploiting those. So when you go to this site, you can actually see that the classifications, so for each hack, it's going to be classified in one of these 4 categories. And then you can take a look at the actual technique that was used for that hack, that incident. Okay, so getting a little bit further. So I like how DeFi Llama kind of breaks it down into the 4 categories and then gives the techniques. There's another framework we're going to look at in a minute, but it goes further into the what I call the Web3 advanced threats and vulnerabilities. And so here you'll see things that that are, again, more specific to a Web3 environment. For example, Oracle and attacks, the money laundering attacks that we'll see, smart contract vulnerabilities, cross-chain vulnerabilities, the inter-contract vulnerabilities, some higher privilege attacks. So some of these are classic, like we've talked about before. But when you get into the actual technology and the tech stack, the implementations, you'll see that there are specific things that you as a cybersecurity pen tester, or if you're developing applications in Web3, things that you need to look out for, things that you need to test for before you, well, actually on a continuous basis, but hopefully you build this kind of testing and mindset into your life cycle of development and operating these platforms. Okay, so the framework that is trending right now is for ethical hacking framework is called the OSWAR, or the Open Standard Web3 Attack Reference, and it is inspired from the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And for those who are familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I think you will love digging into this framework. You can go to the URL here, and you can take a look at the framework. Now, I took a screen capture, and so I'm not showing all of the reference here, the attack reference. You'll have to look at that yourself. But what's nice about it is down here, and it was on the previous slide, you can look at all of these types of threats and vulnerabilities. Well, starting with vulnerabilities, and then the threats are acted on by threat actors. And so you can search on this tool, you can search for something like show me money laundering, and it will actually only highlight on the attack reference, it will only highlight the areas that you should be looking for the execution, like resource development, initial access, similar to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Execution flaws, maybe discovery, there's reconnaissance happening, so very similar to MITRE ATT&CK. I highly encourage you to go out and take a look at this framework. It's referenced in another report that we're going to look at, but it is really something that is very familiar to cybersecurity professionals who are already doing pen testing, DevSecOps work, audit maybe. So please take a look at that, and it will actually help you with the terminologies and some of the newer forms of vulnerabilities and threats. Okay, so next we're going to dive into another really good report on Web3 security. I'm referencing it here. It's current. So this is from Cyverse, and they actually also highlight, similar to what we saw in the previous report, where we're still struggling with the same classic vulnerabilities and threats. So in this case, they're highlighting that access control attacks are constituted the major portion of financial losses on Web3 DeFi platforms, and they get into some very specific examples. I'm going to talk about two of the examples from the report, but if you download the report, you can read through that yourself, but you can see the financial loss here. And so you can see why a lot of threat actors are turning their attention to Web3 technology and exploiting Web3 environments, because of course there's much to gain here. And also here it kind of opens up the report that talks about the top 10 hacks. We're going to cover 2 of the top 10 hacks in the report, but it's the same classic model that you see. So the stages of the attack. So once again, getting back to the Lockheed Martin kill chain, if you're familiar with that, or the MITRE attack reference. So there's going to be some preparation, some reconnaissance happening, then exploitation of the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, the flaws, and then ending the cycle with typically money laundering. Okay, so let's get into 2 examples. The first example from the report, and this is taken straight from the report, but I think it's a good example of how to describe the overall description of the attack. So this was on the Mixin network. And this is a network known for facilitating efficient cross-chain transfers. So right there, there's kind of an indicator of something that could go wrong. We talked about the architecture, the layers, layer 0, 1, 2. You saw the slide where we have trust boundaries, classic trust boundaries, but something else went wrong in this implementation. And I thought this was a good one to highlight, because here there was the breach. It talks about the cloud service provider's database. So the root cause here is that within this decentralized platform, there's actually centralized database that was part of a critical component. And I love the way that this is described here, because it's very true that despite the network decentralized claim, so many of these platforms will claim to be completely autonomous or decentralized, or using this logic on behalf of intermediaries, and you know, it's doing all these zero knowledge proofs and things that are supposed to give you the impression of being very secure. However, things can go very wrong with improper implementation. And so this is a case, and more often than not, you will see that these very popular platforms will have some centralized component. So please be aware that even though we're talking about Web3, that not all of these deployments are completely decentralized, and there's a lot that can go wrong. And so in this case, the centralized component was breached, and it's attributed to access control. All right, the next scenario is another one that happened, and this is again on a decentralized DeFi protocol, so Euler Finance, and this is an example of a victim of a severe flash loan attack. This is something where the threat actor is taking advantage of a smart contract flaw. And at a high level, it goes something like this. So you'll take a flash loan. You'll buy some Ethereum, for example, some type of cryptocurrency with the flash loan. The money will transfer to the threat actor's account immediately. And then they'll go to another exchange. They'll buy some other cryptocurrency with the flash loan. And then they'll have some profit from that. And then they'll go back and pay the original loan, manipulating some logic in the smart contracts and keeping the profit, or in some cases, there's manipulation of the smart contracts where the funds are just siphoned and not paid back. So flash loan attacks are an example of manipulating smart contract logic and doing it within a certain time frame where something is not getting transferred to the blockchain, the ledger. Not all ledgers are immutable, by the way, despite what you might think or hear oftentimes when you hear about blockchain or cryptocurrency. That's not always the case. And so there are weaknesses in the logic, and it's getting exploited within the smart contracts and similar things that you see in Web 2 with maybe cross-site scripting or the ability to inject some type of manipulation into code to basically get it to do something that it's not intended to do. So this is a really good example of something that happened and is actually on the rise. These types of attacks are on the rise, manipulating the logic. The smart contracts themselves, and just like we see with API interactions, oftentimes do not have the best authentication. Certainly authorization is very difficult as well. And so this is an area of growing concern that there's weaknesses in the implementation or even in the ability to have the authorization, authentication, and so really getting back to access control issues, I think. And of course, a lot of these protocols are new. The protocols themselves have flaws, and those are also being manipulated. So what do we do? All right, so I went ahead and built a little tool using Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and something that cybersecurity professionals need to do and often are very familiar with is once you understand the tech stack that you're dealing with, you're going to want to look at some of the security tools that you can use that will help you detect, that will help you mitigate, and will help you understand what environment you have and where the vulnerabilities are. So the first thing I'm showing here is a website by Alchemy, and they're showing some top security tools for Web3. And the reason I like this site is because I've used some of these tools. Many of them are open source. Probably a good place to get started with your learning is to go ahead and take a look at some of these tools. You can download them for free, learn how they work. Fuzzing is a very popular concept in the Web3 space for security tools, and being able to, like for example, fuzz the logic around the smart contracts. Here it gives you some templates and also incorporates the OSWAR framework into the fuzzing templates. So go ahead and take a look at many of these tools. Chain analysis is another tool that's often used by those who are doing forensics when something bad has happened and now you're trying to trace transactions on a blockchain. Chain analysis is a tool that helps with tracing those transactions. Okay. I also want to show, sorry, I skipped a slide, but yeah, so one of the things that you'll want to do is once you're becoming familiar with the platforms that you're looking at, you'll want to look at any type of known vulnerabilities. And so I was thinking about this and went ahead and used Anthropic's AI Claude 3.5 and put in a prompt that said, give me a tool that will show me Web3 type of attacks with key platforms by vendor and also keywords. So this is the web interface that it gave me off to the left, and you can see that there's some of the popular Web3 platforms and protocols, and then also your additional keywords. So it gives you examples of keywords that you can put in. Reentrancy is a very popular type of Web3 attack, manipulating smart contracts once again. But you can see that off to the right, it went ahead and fetched, I put in Ethereum and smart contracts, and it went ahead and fetched all of these CVEs that are known in the MITRE CVE database related to Ethereum and smart contracts. So give it a try. This is a case where, you know, we can use Web3 technology as defenders to help us with managing and understanding what we're dealing with, and hopefully automating a lot of that work to counter some of these attacks. Also, I wanted to mention some protocol-specific terms. So one of the things that you should look at as you're starting your journey into Web3 and understanding the Web3-based protocols are the protocol RFCs, if you will, these versionings of the protocols, what they mean, what capabilities they bring into that particular blockchain or that platform. You'll want to be very familiar with these. Some of these older versions have flaws, and so there's newer implementations. Not all of the environments that you're dealing with may have incorporated some of the newer versions of the protocol to address some of the known security vulnerabilities. And so just like we have in the Web2 space, you're going to want to be familiar with the terms, with the protocols, with the versioning, with the capabilities, and with the security vulnerabilities that they're trying to address. And at the end of the day, it really does get down to proper implementation. Okay, so the last slide here is Web3 cybersecurity career pathways. I'm showing just a couple of examples of the cybersecurity career fields. And down here, I'm giving some links on things that I've found to be very helpful. So here is a reference for a course on smart contract development. So if you are in the SecDevOps engineering space, you might want to take a look at some of the free courses. Become familiar with it before maybe you decide you want to invest in something more paid, like a paid course. But this definitely gives a lot of good base knowledge, so I recommend that. Also, there's by TRM Academy, there's some certifications for threat intel analysts. For pen testers, there's several free capture the flag challenges using Web3 technologies in the CTFs. And so this is a wonderful way to learn by actually doing. You may not have your own environment to test with, so these are open source, free for you to use. You can learn along the way. For forensics and investigations, mentioning once again chain analysis and looking at they have a lot of free courses, but also some paid for tracks and certifications if you're wanting to do investigations or forensics on these blockchain services. Risk and compliance and audit, I'm going to go ahead and reference a framework from C4, the Cryptocurrency Security Standard Auditor certification that also covers the basics of your classic cyber hygiene, but with a focus on key management and some other things specific to Web3 and DeFi platforms. I highly recommend looking at that. And then as a community program manager, I did want to mention this because I have lots of friends who actually have been community program managers and to find themselves in the middle of dealing with questions around privacy, questions around security, phishing, scams. And so for any of you that are program managers, maybe TPMs, take a look at Web3 technologies. And I'm referencing something here from the Blockchain Certified Council Web3 Community Manager Expert course. And this is really designed for those who are managing these large communities and things that you need to know to make it as safe as possible for your community. A lot of awareness and a lot of focus on privacy and, of course, access controls. Okay, so this is my last slide, just giving you resources. Please check them out. I think you'll learn a lot. At a minimum, it's going to give you the right questions to ask, and that was really the goal of today. It's impossible to cover this whole entire space. I mentioned to my facilitators with EC Council that really there could be a series of discussion doing some deep dives specifically on smart contract vulnerabilities, for example. So if there's interest, please let EC Council know, but start by understanding the terminology and being curious and having questions. All right, so that is the end of my talk. Thank you. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Marlene, for delivering such an insightful and informative session. We found the webinar very engaging and hope it was valuable for you as well. So before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that this session is in sync with EC Council CEH program. EC Council Certified Ethical Hacker certification is mapped to a variety of roles in the cybersecurity industry, including ethical hacker, security analyst, security consultant, site administrator, and network management executive. As per LinkedIn 2022, it lists over 1,000 jobs seeking ethical hacking skills worldwide, and individuals holding the CEH certification can earn an average annual salary of USD 96,000 in the United States. Pay scale 2022. If you're interested in learning more, please participate in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you soon. So, Marlene, should we proceed with the question and answer?
Yes, that'd be great.
So the first question is, hi, can you please explain decentralized finance again? Also, what is the impact of Web3 hacks on big data, especially from a blockchain perspective?
Yes, I think the first part of that question is defining DeFi, and this is the concept of decentralized finance and the idea that we can eliminate intermediaries with code, with consensus algorithms, with blockchain technologies, with distributed ledgers. So as the presentation hopefully conveyed, is that there's a lot that can go wrong with any technology. And one of the things that I think has been a little bit maybe confusing or overstated is the idea that if we have blockchain and consensus algorithms, zero knowledge proofs, cryptography, you know, all these big words, right? That certainly it's secure, it solves all these problems. Well, not necessarily so, because once again, there are vulnerabilities, there's flaws in code, none of that goes away. Implementation goes wrong, incorporating decentralized systems, centralized capabilities to deal with scaling issues. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. As a matter of fact, earlier in the talk, I said Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. So it's a plus situation. We're going through all the classic things that are in place and flawed today, and now we're adding more on top of that. So hopefully that describes the aspirational goals of decentralized platforms, is getting smarter with automation, getting smarter with proper implementations of cryptography, zero knowledge proof, consensus algorithms, but that is where the journey and the curiosity and the question should begin, is understanding the proper implementations. I think the second part of that question, if you can just repeat the second part.
So the second part states that what is the impact of Web3 hacks on big data, especially from a blockchain perspective?
Right, and so, yeah, exactly what I already said is that you can see, and I highly encourage you to take a look at the two reports referenced in this presentation, because it will give you a very, very good overview, especially the CERTIC report with the top 10 hacks, and then even DeFi Llama. If you go and look today, right now, DeFi Llama at the hacks that they're trending daily or as they occur, you can take a look and dig into what went wrong there. So you're seeing things like key compromise, access control issues, and that really is some of the problem is integrity. So the question about big data, even LLMs, AI models, etc., is there's a lot of concern about the integrity of the underlying data itself. And if that is flawed, then of course a lot goes wrong at the layers above.
Thank you for answering that. Our next question is, what are the most common vulnerabilities in blockchain-based platforms?
I think it's improper key management. I would have to say that that is probably a very important focus area. I would encourage everyone to take a look at C4, the Certified Cryptocurrency Security Standard Auditor Framework, and for free you can take a look at the areas that a certified auditor would audit against, and it's a very good framework that will help you look at the domain areas, the controls, and you'll see that there's a lot of focus on proper key management and of course access controls. Other things that can go wrong specific to blockchain implementations, I would say, is improper use of the validator nodes that are running the consensus algorithms, and depending on the proof of the consensus, you've probably heard of things like proof of work, proof of stake, proof of history. There's all sorts of proofs. And the idea behind it is that there's some automation that's happening amongst the validators in a blockchain that are running the consensus algorithm and coming out with some kind of a consensus or an output for whatever the protocol is. And there's a lot that can go wrong in a proof of stake situation, for example, or a proof of history. There's many proofs, not just one. When you hear about proof of something or zero knowledge proofs, it sometimes seems like it's just this one thing that solves all problems because it's based on cryptography. And once again, unfortunately, that is not true. You can have a very small number of validator nodes that are running the proofs, and so you don't have a lot of trust in these nodes that are running by a central authority, for example. So just because there's consensus algorithms and there's validator nodes that are running doesn't mean that they're not under some kind of central platform control. And so I would caution against the idea that Web3, yes, it does have characteristics of decentralization, but the implementations are not always decentralized. And so you have to really dig into the architecture, dig into the protocols, dig into the implementations to really understand where those flaws are.
Thank you for answering that, Marlene. Our next question is, could you recommend open source or free to use tools to identify malicious deepfake videos? For example, use case early detection of malicious AI created video of company chairman.
Yeah, I think this is an emerging area. And earlier I gave a talk, several months back, I gave a talk on risks with AI platform, and kind of get into what's going on there. And many of the platform providers are actually actively working on putting in mechanisms, whether it's watermarking or whether it's some way to do some verification or some provenance metadata, for example, back to the generation or the platform creation itself. There are lots of tools out there that claim to be able to, recognize deep fakes, but until we have kind of a concept of the verification. You'll see a lot of social media platforms are actually trying to promote verification. And I'm a big fan of that, actually. If you're producing content, then you should opt into the verification mechanisms and be willing to attribute the source to the platforms. For example, I used Anthropic's Claude 3.5 Sonnet to build that simple web interface, and it's a great capability. So this is the case where these platforms can actually help defenders, can help cybersecurity with the exponential threats and the acceleration of the risk that we're seeing. But I don't think there's any one good tool that I can recommend right now. There's probably several out there. I would encourage all of you to share that later in posts if you find one that's been very helpful. But I would say this is an emerging space. And if we think about the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, availability. So a lot of what I'm seeing is threats to integrity. And I think that that's something that is an opportunity as we look to try to improve where we're at from the Web 2 era that we're into. And I do hope that the promise of getting the decentralized technologies, the proper implementations of zero knowledge proofs, cryptography, I do hope that the promise of that will come to fruition and that we'll see a lot of good things happening with solving these big issues in the cybersecurity realm. But meanwhile, we still have to be very careful and very cautious about threats to integrity.
Thank you for answering that, Marlene. I'll take last question. Is Tornado Cash a Web3 app? I understand that Web3 is just an FE interface to interact with various smart contracts. Do I view it correctly, or do I miss something about the Web3?
You know, that is a great point, and I would refer you back to the reference architecture. So oftentimes you'll see L1, L2, dApps, and so forth. So yes, there are what you would expect, just like in the OSI model, in the web application framework, you know, with layer 7. Yes, you do have things happening at different layers and therefore trust boundaries. Anyone who's done threat modeling understands risks that happen between the threat boundaries. So many of these applications, like Tornado Cash, for example, are running at an application layer and they're interfacing with the layers below. And so a lot can go wrong, just like we see today with data exchange, even with your classic APIs, where APIs lack authorization. So I think that the question is great because it's reflecting your understanding that, hey, it's just an interface at the end of the day, and there's other things below that I need to understand how they work. And I think that this is somewhat part of the danger too, and why phishing and access control issues remain in the top vulnerability and threat trends when you look at what goes wrong, is because it is very confusing. And there is fakes that are happening or intercepting, being able to scan QR codes to you know, thinking that you're exchanging some kind of cryptocurrency on a platform only to have that QR code take you to a malicious site. The user interfaces are very complex. So there's a lot of things that could happen there. And I think that's also one of the bigger opportunities is for those who are in the UI space for end user. I would love to see the developers and the creators work with the security teams to ensure that there are some indicators in UI interfaces as you're dealing with these exchanges and with the decentralized applications, that there's some kind of security that's built in for end users, because it is very, very confusing. And I think it's also an opportunity, though, to improve on some of the risks. We need better UI, better wallets, more intuitive, more secure. That's a whole conversation in itself, but I think it's a good question, and I would encourage you to, as you're, using Tornado Cash or any of these types of applications, to maybe do your own testing. There's some of the free test tools as you're looking at how those are getting installed, the seed phrases, where your secrets are being kept in browsers, and so forth. So I think that would be a really good place to start, is using the tools, and then as a security professional, maybe using the security tools to inspect the flows, to inspect where things are stored in memory on your mobile devices or in your native browsers on your desktops. I think that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much to our wonderful speaker, Marlene, for answering all those questions and for the great presentation and the knowledge you shared with our global audience. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. So before we conclude the webinar, Marlene, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
I just want to thank you all for taking this time, being curious, and just know that business is good in cybersecurity. Do check out CEH 13 that incorporates AI. Use the capabilities, use the tools to defend whatever networks, whatever environments that you use and that you are a part of. And thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Marlene.